Trevor Walsh had spent 47 years building what most people would consider a successful life. He owned a small but profitable auto repair shop in Cedar Falls, Iowa, employed 6 mechanics, and had saved enough money to buy his house outright after his divorce 5 years earlier. His 2-story colonial sat on 3 acres of well-maintained land, complete with a workshop where he restored classic cars as a hobby. Friends and family saw Trevor as the steady one, the guy who always had his life together, the man who made practical decisions based on logic rather than emotion. But what they didn't see was the crushing loneliness that had settled into his chest like a weight he couldn't lift, growing heavier with each passing month of solitary dinners and empty weekend mornings. The divorce from Linda hadn't been bitter or dramatic, just the slow, inevitable dissolution of 2 people who had grown apart over 15 years of marriage. No children, no custody battles, just the quiet division of possessions and the realization that they had become strangers sharing the same house. Linda moved to California to be closer to her sister, and Trevor threw himself into work, convincing himself that staying busy was the same as being happy. His brother Danny worried about him, stopping by the shop regularly with invitations to dinner or weekend fishing trips, but Trevor usually declined with polite excuses about being too busy or too tired. The truth was simpler and more painful than he wanted to admit. He had forgotten how to be around people, forgotten how to make conversation that didn't revolve around carburetors and transmission fluid. It was Jamie Morrison, his longtime friend and the shop's bookkeeper, who finally forced the issue on a particularly cold February evening in 2018. Trevor was staying late again, ostensibly to finish paperwork but really just to avoid going home to his empty house, when Jamie knocked on the office door with 2 cups of coffee and a determined expression. She had worked for him for 8 years, had watched him gradually withdraw from social activities, had seen him decline invitation after invitation until people stopped asking. Jamie was 52, divorced herself, and possessed the kind of straightforward honesty that came from surviving her own share of heartbreak and disappointment. "Trevor," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk without waiting for an invitation, "we need to talk. You can't keep living like this. When's the last time you went on a date? When's the last time you talked to someone who wasn't either a customer or an employee?" Trevor looked up from the invoices he'd been pretending to review, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm fine, Jamie. I don't need you to worry about me." "That's exactly what someone who's not fine always says," she replied, pulling out her phone. "My daughter got me on this dating website last year. I've met some interesting people, had some decent conversations. Nothing serious yet, but at least I'm trying. You should try too." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jamie patiently dismantling every excuse Trevor offered. He was too old, too set in his ways, too focused on work. Online dating was for younger people, for people who were good at presenting themselves, for people who knew how to flirt and charm. But Jamie persisted with the gentle stubbornness of someone who genuinely cared, and eventually Trevor found himself reluctantly agreeing to let her help him set up a profile, if only to end the conversation and get back to his invoices. 3 days later, Trevor found himself staring at a laptop screen in his living room, trying to figure out how to describe himself to complete strangers on a dating website called Soul Connect. Jamie had insisted on this particular site because it focused on meaningful relationships rather than casual encounters, and she had helped him select photos that showed him as he really was, a tall, lean man with graying brown hair and kind eyes, wearing his usual uniform of jeans and flannel shirts. His profile was honest to the point of being almost brutal. Divorced mechanic, 47, owns his own business, lives alone, enjoys working with his hands, restoring old cars and quiet evenings at home. Looking for genuine connection with someone who values honesty and isn't interested in games. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened. Trevor checked the site sporadically, usually late at night when the silence in his house became too oppressive to bear, but his inbox remained empty. He was beginning to think the whole enterprise was a mistake when a message appeared from someone with the username Cassie in Sunshine. The profile photo showed a woman with auburn hair and a warm smile, sitting in what appeared to be a sunlit room with plants visible in the background. Her message was simple and direct. "Hi Trevor, I read your profile and appreciated your honesty. I'm Cassandra, but everyone calls me Cassie. I'm 41, live in Clearwater, Florida, and I'm also looking for something real. Your profile mentioned restoring classic cars, and I have to admit I find that fascinating. My late father was a mechanic and I grew up around engines and tools. Would you like to chat?" Trevor stared at the message for several minutes before responding. There was something appealing about her straightforward approach, the way she had shared a personal detail about her father, the lack of obvious flirtation or game-playing. He wrote back that evening, telling her about the 1967 Mustang he was currently working on, asking about her memories of her father's work, sharing a few details about his own shop and the satisfaction he found in fixing things that seemed beyond repair. Her response came the next morning, longer and more detailed than his first message, describing how her father had taught her to change oil and check tire pressure, how the smell of motor oil and WD-40 still reminded her of weekend mornings spent in his garage, how she missed having someone in her life who understood the simple pleasure of working with their hands to create or repair something useful. Their correspondence quickly developed into a daily routine. Trevor would check for her messages first thing in the morning and again during his lunch break, then spend his evenings crafting thoughtful responses to her questions and observations. Cassie was intelligent and articulate, with a dry sense of humor that reminded him of Jamie's straightforward wit. She told him she worked as a freelance graphic designer, mostly doing websites and marketing materials for small businesses, which allowed her to work from home and set her own schedule. She had moved to Florida after her father's death 3 years earlier, wanting a fresh start in a place with year-round sunshine and no memories attached to every street corner and familiar building. As their exchanges grew longer and more personal, Trevor found himself looking forward to her messages with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Cassie was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in his work and his thoughts, quick to share her own experiences and opinions without seeming to need constant validation or attention. She told him about the small house she rented near the beach, about her morning walks along the shore, about the stray cat that had adopted her despite her protests that she wasn't ready for the responsibility of caring for another living creature. She sent him photos of spectacular Florida sunsets, asked for pictures of his latest restoration project, shared stories about her most challenging design clients and laughed at his tales of customers who thought they knew more about car repair than someone who had been doing it professionally for 25 years. By the end of March, they were exchanging messages multiple times throughout the day, their conversations ranging from serious discussions about their past relationships and future hopes to playful debates about everything from the best pizza toppings to the most overrated movies of all time. Trevor found himself smiling at work, sharing particularly funny exchanges with Jamie, who watched his gradual transformation with quiet satisfaction. He was sleeping better, eating more regularly, taking greater care with his appearance, and showing genuine enthusiasm for something outside of work for the first time in years. It was Cassie who first suggested they talk on the phone, mentioning in an April message that she missed the sound of human voices after spending so many hours alone with her computer and design software. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours, flowing as easily as their written exchanges but with the added intimacy of hearing each other's laughter, the pauses and inflections that revealed personality in ways that text could never capture. Trevor's voice was deeper than Cassie had expected, with a slight Midwestern accent that she found charming, while her voice had a warmth that made him think of honey in summer afternoons. Phone calls became another daily ritual, usually in the evenings after Trevor closed the shop and Cassie finished her work for the day. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing childhood memories and fears about the future, discussing books they had read and places they wanted to visit, debating politics and philosophy with the comfortable disagreement of people who respected each other's intelligence even when they didn't share the same opinions. Trevor told her things he had never shared with anyone, not even Linda during their best years together. He described the loneliness that had consumed him after the divorce, the way he had gradually isolated himself from friends and family, the mornings when he woke up and couldn't immediately remember what day it was because they all blended together in an endless repetition of work and solitary meals and empty conversations with his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Cassie listened without judgment, offering comfort without trying to fix him, sharing her own stories of isolation and grief in the months after her father's death when she had struggled to find meaning in a world that suddenly felt empty and unfamiliar. These conversations created an intimacy that surprised them both, a sense of being truly known and accepted that neither had experienced in years. By late May, Trevor was spending more money on long-distance phone calls than he had on entertainment in the previous 5 years combined, but he didn't care. Talking to Cassie had become the best part of his day, the thing he looked forward to from the moment he woke up until the moment her voice said goodnight and he reluctantly hung up the phone. Jamie noticed the change in him immediately, commenting on how much happier he seemed, How he hummed while he worked and actually smiled when customers walked into the shop instead of just nodding politely and getting straight to business. It was during one of their late-night conversations in early June that Cassie first mentioned her health problems, explaining why she had been less responsive to his messages over the past few days. She told him she had been dealing with some medical issues, nothing life-threatening but certainly life-altering, that made it difficult for her to get around as easily as she once had. She was deliberately vague about the specifics, saying only that she had gained weight due to medication and mobility issues, that she was working with doctors to find solutions, and that she sometimes felt self-conscious about how much she had changed from the person she used to be. Trevor's response was immediate and heartfelt. Physical appearance meant nothing to him compared to the connection they had built, the way she understood him, the comfort and joy she brought to his days. He told her about his own insecurities, the way he had let himself go somewhat after the divorce, the gray hair and extra pounds that reminded him daily that he was no longer young, the fear that he had nothing to offer someone as vibrant and intelligent as she seemed to be. Cassie's relief was audible in her voice as she thanked him for his understanding, telling him that his acceptance meant more to her than he could possibly know, that she had been afraid to mention her health issues because so many people seemed to lose interest once physical limitations became part of the conversation. Their bond deepened even further after this exchange, with both of them feeling that they had crossed some invisible threshold into complete honesty and acceptance. Trevor began sending her small gifts, flowers delivered to her address in Florida, books he thought she might enjoy, a coffee mug from his favorite local cafe because she had mentioned missing good Midwestern coffee. Cassie reciprocated with thoughtful packages of her own, sending him Florida oranges and handmade cards featuring her graphic design work, a vintage car magazine she had found at a flea market that featured an article about 1967 Mustangs. As summer progressed, their conversations inevitably turned to the possibility of meeting in person. Trevor was eager to make the trip to Florida, already researching flights and hotels, talking about taking a long weekend to visit her and see the beaches she described so lovingly in their conversations. But Cassie seemed hesitant, always finding reasons to postpone or delay, citing work deadlines or medical appointments or family obligations that never seemed to have been mentioned before. When Trevor pressed gently for specifics, she would change the subject or become emotional, talking about how much their relationship meant to her and how terrified she was that meeting in person might somehow ruin the perfect connection they had built over the phone and through their messages. Trevor interpreted her reluctance as insecurity about her appearance, the weight gain and mobility issues she had mentioned, and he redoubled his efforts to reassure her that physical attraction was less important to him than emotional compatibility. He told her repeatedly that he was falling in love with her mind, her humor, her kindness, her ability to listen and understand and offer comfort without judgment. He shared his own fears about meeting, the worry that he might disappoint her in person, that the chemistry they felt over the phone might not translate to face-to-face interaction, that she might realize he was just a small-town mechanic with grease under his fingernails and nothing particularly interesting to offer someone as worldly and creative as she seemed to be. If you're still reading this story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Your engagement helps us bring more incredible true stories to light, and we love connecting with viewers from around the world who are drawn to these complex human experiences. By August, Trevor had made a decision that surprised even him. He wanted to relocate to Florida to be closer to Cassie, to build a life with her, to leave behind the loneliness and isolation that had defined his existence for the past 5 years. The idea had started as a passing thought during one of their conversations when she mentioned how much she loved the Florida lifestyle, the warm weather, the proximity to the ocean, the sense of possibility that seemed to permeate every day. Trevor found himself imagining what it would be like to wake up next to her, to share morning coffee while watching the sunrise over the water, to build something real and lasting with someone who understood him completely. The more he thought about it, the more logical it seemed. His auto repair business was successful but not irreplaceable. There were mechanics everywhere, and Florida certainly had its share of cars that needed fixing. He could sell the shop, sell his house, take the equity and start fresh somewhere warm and bright and full of promise. The idea energized him in ways he hadn't felt in years, giving him a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing since his divorce. When he mentioned the possibility to Cassie during a phone call in late August, her reaction was everything he had hoped for and more. She cried with happiness, telling him that she had been afraid to hope for something so wonderful, that the thought of having him nearby filled her with a joy she hadn't experienced since her father's death. They spent hours discussing the practical details, with Cassie offering to help him find a suitable location for a new auto repair business, promising to introduce him to her network of contacts in the area, painting vivid pictures of the life they could build together in the Florida sunshine. Trevor began making concrete plans immediately. He contacted a commercial real estate agent in the Clearwater area, researched the local automotive repair market, started the process of putting his Iowa property up for sale. Jamie was shocked when he told her about his decision, warning him that he was moving too fast, that online relationships could be deceiving, that he should at least visit Florida and meet Cassie in person before making such a dramatic life change. But Trevor was convinced that what he and Cassie shared was real and lasting, built on months of honest communication and emotional intimacy that felt more genuine than anything he had experienced in his marriage. Danny was even more concerned, driving out to the shop one afternoon in September to have what he called a brotherly intervention. He had watched Trevor's transformation over the past months with growing unease, worried that his brother was investing too much too quickly in a relationship with someone he had never actually met. Danny pointed out that Trevor knew surprisingly little about Cassie's day-to-day life, that she had been consistently vague about her medical issues, that her reluctance to meet in person could indicate she was hiding something significant. But Trevor dismissed these concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding, insisting that true connection transcended physical proximity, that he and Cassie had built something deeper and more meaningful than most couples achieved after years of traditional dating. The sale of Trevor's house proceeded quickly, with a young couple offering the full asking price within 2 weeks of the listing going live. The auto repair shop took longer to find a buyer, but by October, Trevor had negotiated a deal with a regional chain that wanted to expand their presence in the Cedar Falls area. The combined proceeds from both sales, plus his savings and retirement accounts, gave him nearly $400,000 to start his new life in Florida. It was more money than Trevor had ever had at one time, enough to buy a house, establish a new business, and support himself comfortably while getting established in a new state. Throughout this process, his conversations with Cassie became increasingly romantic and future-focused. They talked about the house they would share, the business he would build, the trips they would take together once her health improved. Cassie painted detailed pictures of their future life, describing morning walks on the beach, evening dinners at local restaurants, lazy weekends exploring the small towns and natural areas that made Florida special. Her enthusiasm for their shared future was infectious, and Trevor found himself working longer hours and sleeping less as he rushed to complete the sale process and arrange his move. The logistics proved more complicated than Trevor had anticipated. Cassie's medical situation had apparently worsened in recent weeks, making it difficult for her to help with house hunting or business location scouting as she had originally promised. She explained that she was dealing with increased mobility issues that made leaving her house challenging, but she assured him that she was working with a real estate agent who could show him properties and help him find the perfect location for his new auto repair business. Instead of visiting Florida to look at properties in person, Trevor found himself relying on virtual tours and Cassie's recommendations, trusting her judgment about neighborhoods and commercial locations based on her years of living in the area. She seemed knowledgeable about local business conditions and residential areas, offering detailed opinions about traffic patterns, demographics, and growth potential that impressed Trevor with their sophistication and insight. By November, Trevor had committed to purchasing a small house in Clearwater, just 15 minutes from Cassie's address, and had put a deposit down on a commercial space that seemed perfect for an automotive repair business. The house was modest but charming, with 2 bedrooms and a small garage that could serve as a workshop for his classic car restoration hobby. The commercial space was in a busy area with good visibility and easy access, close enough to residential neighborhoods to attract local customers but with enough space for the equipment and tools he would need to establish a successful business. The final weeks before Trevor's move to Florida passed in a blur of packing, paperwork, and increasingly frequent phone calls with Cassie. She seemed genuinely excited about his impending arrival, spending hours discussing their plans for his first weeks in Clearwater, the local restaurants they would visit together, the beaches they would explore once she felt well enough to venture out more regularly. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Trevor found himself working 16-hour days to wrap up his affairs in Iowa, eager to start his new life with the woman who had transformed his world from hundreds of miles away. Yet even as his excitement built, small inconsistencies in Cassie's stories began to accumulate. She mentioned being unable to meet him at the airport due to car troubles, then later referred to driving to a doctor's appointment the same week. When he offered to arrange airport transportation or suggested meeting at her house instead of a restaurant for their first face-to-face encounter, she quickly changed the subject or found reasons why those alternatives wouldn't work. She spoke frequently about her mobility issues but seemed vague about the specific nature of her condition, describing symptoms that didn't quite align with any particular diagnosis Trevor could research online. Jamie was the first to voice what others were thinking but hesitant to say directly. She stopped by Trevor's house on a cold December afternoon, ostensibly to help with packing but really to make one final attempt to slow down what she saw as a runaway train heading toward disaster. "Trevor," she said, sitting among the boxes that contained his entire life, "I care about you too much to watch this happen without saying something. You're about to move across the country for someone you've never met in person. Don't you think that's a little crazy?" Trevor looked up from the photo albums he was sorting, irritation flashing across his face. "We've been talking for 10 months, Jamie. I know her better than I knew Linda after 15 years of marriage. Real connection doesn't require physical proximity." Jamie shook her head, her expression mixing frustration with genuine concern. "Real connection requires honesty, Trevor. And there's something about this situation that doesn't feel honest to me. Why won't she meet you? Why won't she video chat? Why is she always too sick or too busy or too something when you suggest actually seeing each other?" The argument that followed was heated but brief, with Trevor accusing Jamie of jealousy and small-town narrow-mindedness, while Jamie accused him of willful blindness and dangerous naivety. They parted on terms that weren't quite friendly, with Jamie promising to keep his job open for 6 months in case he wanted to come back to Iowa, and Trevor insisting that he would never need to return because he was moving toward happiness instead of running away from loneliness. Danny made his own final attempt at intervention on Trevor's last night in Cedar Falls, showing up at the house with beer and takeout from their favorite restaurant. They sat among the moving boxes and talked about childhood memories, shared experiences, and the bond between brothers that had sustained them through divorce, death, and disappointment. Danny was more subtle than Jamie had been, asking gentle questions about Trevor's expectations, expressing concern about the financial risk of starting over in an unfamiliar place, wondering aloud whether love might be clouding Trevor's usually practical judgment. "I just want you to be happy," Danny said, finishing his second beer and looking directly at his brother. "But I also want you to be safe. And something about this situation feels risky to me. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe she's everything you think she is. But maybe she's not. Maybe she's hiding something important. What if you get down there and discover that the woman you've fallen in love with doesn't exist?" Trevor's response was defensive but not angry. He understood his family's concerns, appreciated their love and worry, but insisted that they couldn't understand the depth of connection he and Cassie had built through months of honest communication. He described conversations that had lasted until dawn, moments of vulnerability and support that had healed wounds he didn't even know he was carrying, a sense of being completely known and accepted that felt like coming home after years of wandering in the wilderness. Physical appearance, mobility issues, even serious health problems couldn't diminish what they shared, he insisted. If anything, Cassie's struggles made him love her more deeply, made him want to protect and care for her in ways that felt both natural and necessary. The drive to Florida took Trevor 3 days, with his belongings following in a moving truck that would arrive 2 days after him. He had planned the route carefully, wanting to see parts of the country he had never visited, to make the journey itself part of his adventure rather than just an obstacle to overcome. He drove through Kentucky and Tennessee, Georgia and Alabama, staying in small motels and eating at local diners, calling Cassie each evening to share his observations and experiences, to hear her voice and feel connected to his destination. Cassie seemed increasingly nervous as his arrival approached, asking repeatedly about his exact schedule, expressing concern about her ability to be the companion he deserved during his first weeks in a new place. She worried aloud about disappointing him, about not being well enough to show him around properly, about the gap between his expectations and her current reality. Trevor reassured her constantly, insisting that simply being together would be enough, that he didn't need entertainment or guided tours, that he was moving to Florida to build a life with her, not to become a tourist. When he finally crossed the Florida state line on a bright January morning in 2019, Trevor felt a sense of anticipation and possibility that he hadn't experienced since childhood. The landscape was alien and wonderful, all palm trees and blue skies and unfamiliar architecture, a physical representation of the new life he was about to begin. He called Cassie from a gas station just outside Gainesville, telling her he was only a few hours away, asking if she was ready for their long-awaited meeting. Her voice was different that morning, strained and emotional in ways that made Trevor wonder if she was more nervous than excited. She told him she had been awake all night, alternately thrilled and terrified about seeing him face to face, worried that reality might somehow diminish the perfect connection they had built over the phone. Trevor did his best to comfort her, reminding her that he loved her for who she was inside, that physical concerns were irrelevant compared to the emotional bond they shared, that nothing could change the way he felt about her after 10 months of the most honest and intimate communication of his life. They arranged to meet at a restaurant called Ocean's Edge, a casual seafood place near the beach that Cassie had described as her favorite local spot. Trevor would arrive around 6 in the evening, giving him time to check into his hotel and clean up after the long drive. Cassie would meet him there, and they could finally sit across from each other, hold hands, look into each other's eyes, begin the next chapter of their relationship as a couple sharing the same physical space instead of just the same emotional wavelength. Trevor spent the afternoon in his hotel room, showering and shaving with unusual care, changing clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a button-down shirt that he hoped struck the right balance between casual and respectful. He had brought a small gift for Cassie, a delicate silver necklace he had chosen because she had mentioned loving jewelry but rarely buying any for herself since her father's death. The necklace seemed like the perfect way to mark their transition from virtual to real, a tangible symbol of his commitment to building something lasting with her. As 6 o'clock approached, Trevor's nervousness increased exponentially. He checked his appearance in the mirror a dozen times, practiced different versions of what he might say when he first saw her, worried about everything from his breath to his posture to the possibility that she might find him less attractive in person than she had imagined during their phone conversations. The rational part of his mind knew that she was probably experiencing the same anxieties, that first meetings were always awkward regardless of how well people knew each other beforehand, that the connection they had built would carry them through any initial discomfort. He arrived at Ocean's Edge 15 minutes early, wanting to secure a good table and compose himself before Cassie's arrival. The restaurant was busy but not crowded, filled with the kind of casual, friendly atmosphere that made Trevor feel slightly more relaxed. He chose a table near the window with a view of the parking lot, partly because he wanted to see Cassie arrive and partly because he wanted her to be able to spot him easily when she walked in. If you've ever moved across the country for love, or taken a major risk for someone you met online, let us know in the comments below. These stories remind us how powerful human connection can be, but also how vulnerable we become when we open our hearts to strangers. 6 o'clock came and went without any sign of Cassie. Trevor checked his phone repeatedly, expecting a message explaining that she was running late or having trouble finding the restaurant. When no message arrived, he called her number, but the phone went straight to voicemail. By 6:30, Trevor was beginning to worry that something had happened, that Cassie might have had a medical emergency or car trouble or some other crisis that prevented her from keeping their appointment. At 7 o'clock, Trevor's phone finally rang. Cassie's voice was barely above a whisper, strained with emotion and what sounded like physical pain. "Trevor, I'm so sorry. I'm at the restaurant but I can't come in. I'm in the parking lot and I'm scared. I'm scared that when you see me, you'll realize I'm not who you thought I was. I'm scared that I've been lying to you, not intentionally, but lying by omission about how much I've changed, how difficult things have become for me." Trevor's heart clenched with sympathy and confusion. He looked out the window, scanning the parking lot for any sign of her, but saw only the usual collection of cars and trucks with no indication of which one might contain the woman he had traveled across the country to meet. "Cassie," he said gently, "whatever you're worried about, we can work through it together. I didn't move to Florida because of how you look. I moved here because of who you are, because of what we've built together, because I love you." There was a long pause before Cassie spoke again, her voice breaking with tears. "Trevor, I need you to understand something before you see me. I'm not the person in those photos I sent you. Those pictures are old, from before my father died, before everything changed. I'm sick, Trevor. I'm very sick, and I've gained a lot of weight because of my condition and the medications. I can barely walk. I haven't left my house in months except for medical appointments. I'm not the active, independent woman you think you're meeting tonight. Trevor felt the first stirrings of something that wasn't quite alarm but wasn't comfort either. How much weight are we talking about, Cassie? It doesn't matter to me, but I can see that it matters to you, so tell me what we're dealing with. Another pause, longer this time. Trevor, I weigh over 1,000 pounds. I can't stand up without help. I can't fit through normal doorways. I haven't been able to leave my house without special transportation in over a year. I'm not at the restaurant, Trevor. I'm at home and I can't come to you. If you want to meet me, you'll have to come here. The phone slipped from Trevor's hand, clattering onto the restaurant table as the words echoed in his head. Over 1,000 pounds. Can't stand up without help. Can't fit through normal doorways. The woman he had spent 10 months falling in love with, the woman for whom he had sold his house and business and moved across the country, was essentially bedridden in a way that she had never fully disclosed during their hundreds of hours of conversation. Trevor's mind struggled to process this information, to reconcile the active, vibrant person he had imagined with the reality Cassie had just described. He picked up the phone with trembling fingers. Cassie, he said, his voice barely steady, why didn't you tell me? I mean, I knew you had health issues, but this is why couldn't you trust me enough to be honest about this? Her sobbing was audible through the phone, raw and desperate in a way that made Trevor's chest ache despite his shock and confusion. I wanted to tell you, she whispered. I tried to tell you so many times. But every time I started to explain, I would think about how perfect everything was between us, how happy you seemed, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing that. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Trevor sat in the busy restaurant surrounded by the normal conversations and clinking of dishes, feeling completely disconnected from the ordinary world around him. Other diners laughed and talked about their day, completely unaware that his entire future was collapsing in real time. I don't understand, he said finally. How does someone gain that much weight? What kind of condition causes that? And how have you been living? How do you take care of yourself? Cassie's explanation came in fragments between tears and struggling breaths. After her father's death, she had fallen into a severe depression that manifested partly through compulsive eating. The weight gain had been gradual at first, then accelerated when she developed a thyroid condition that went undiagnosed for months. Medications prescribed for depression and anxiety had side effects that increased her appetite and slowed her metabolism. As she gained weight, mobility became more difficult, which led to a more sedentary lifestyle, which led to more weight gain in a cycle she couldn't break. By the time doctors recognized the severity of her condition, she was already too heavy to leave her house easily. Her world had shrunk to the confines of her small rental home, where her sister Rachel visited twice a week to bring groceries and help with personal care, and a rotating series of home health aides assisted with tasks she could no longer perform independently. Her graphic design work was conducted entirely online, with clients who had no idea that the professional, articulate person they communicated with via email was physically trapped in her own body. The worst part, Cassie continued, her voice growing stronger as she forced herself to explain, was the shame. I felt like I had become invisible to the world, like I had stopped being a real person. When I started talking to you, it was the first time in years that someone saw me as more than just my condition, more than just a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. You talked to me like I was still a woman worth knowing, worth caring about. I didn't want to lose that feeling. Trevor understood intellectually why she had hidden this information, but emotionally he felt betrayed in a way that reminded him painfully of his previous relationships. The discovery that the person he thought he knew had been presenting a carefully constructed version of themselves rather than the complete truth. Yet this situation was different from his ex-wife's financial deceptions or his former girlfriend's living arrangements. Cassie hadn't been malicious or calculating. She had been afraid and lonely and desperate to maintain a connection that gave her life meaning. Where do you live? Trevor asked after a long silence. Give me your address. I'm coming to see you. Cassie's response was immediate panic. No, Trevor, please don't. Not tonight. I'm not ready. I look terrible. The house isn't prepared for visitors. Please, let me have some time to figure out how to do this properly. But Trevor was already standing up, leaving money on the table for his untouched drink, walking toward the restaurant exit with the phone pressed to his ear. Cassie, I didn't move to Florida to have a relationship over the phone. I moved here to be with you, to build something real. That means dealing with reality, not some fantasy version where everything is easy and comfortable. Give me your address or I'll start knocking on doors until I find you. The threat was gentle but serious, and after another moment of hesitation, Cassie provided her street address, a location about 20 minutes from the restaurant according to Trevor's phone's GPS. The drive through Clearwater's residential neighborhoods gave Trevor time to think about what he was about to encounter and what it might mean for his future. He had imagined many scenarios for their first meeting, from instant chemistry to awkward nervousness to the gradual building of physical attraction to match their emotional connection. He had never imagined this, a situation where the woman he loved was physically incapable of the kind of relationship he had envisioned. As he turned onto Cassie Street, Trevor was struck by how normal everything looked. Small, well-maintained houses with neat lawns and porch lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested that one of these homes contained someone living in the kind of isolation and limitation that Cassie had described. He found her address easily, a pale blue house with white trim and a small front porch, identical to dozens of others on the street except for the wheelchair ramp that led to the front door. Trevor parked in the driveway and sat for several minutes, trying to prepare himself for whatever he was about to see. His phone buzzed with a text from Cassie. I'm scared, Trevor. Please be kind. The front door is unlocked. I'm in the back bedroom. His heart ached reading those words, understanding for the first time how vulnerable she was making herself, how much courage it must have taken for her to agree to this meeting. The front door opened into a living room that looked almost normal, furnished with a sectional sofa and coffee table, television and bookshelves, the kind of space that could belong to any single person living a quiet life. But Trevor noticed immediately that the furniture had been arranged to create wide pathways, and there were grab bars installed along the walls at regular intervals. The house had been modified for someone with significant mobility challenges. Trevor, Cassie called from somewhere toward the back of the house, her voice carrying a mixture of welcome and terror. I'm back here. Please don't judge me too harshly. He followed her voice down a hallway that had been widened by removing what must have originally been a closet, past a bathroom that had been completely renovated with accessibility equipment, to a bedroom door that was wider than standard residential doors. The room itself was larger than the master bedroom in most homes, clearly created by combining two smaller rooms into one space. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and despite the medical equipment scattered around the edges of the room, it felt warm and lived in rather than clinical. But Trevor's attention was immediately focused on the hospital-style bed in the center of the space, and the woman lying in it who bore little resemblance to the photos he had seen but whose voice he recognized immediately. Cassie looked at him with eyes that were simultaneously hopeful and terrified, beautiful and familiar despite being set in a face much larger than he had expected. Her auburn hair, which he had seen in photographs, was shorter now but still lovely, framing features that were recognizable but dramatically changed by the weight she carried. She was wearing a loose-fitting dress in a soft blue color that complemented her eyes, and she had clearly made an effort to look as good as possible given her limitations. "Hi," she said quietly, her voice carrying all the warmth and intelligence that had attracted him during their months of conversation, but also a new note of vulnerability that made Trevor's chest tighten with emotion. "I know this isn't what you expected. I know I should have prepared you better. But I'm so glad you came. I'm so glad you're here." Trevor stood in the doorway for a moment, processing the reality of seeing her in person, understanding for the first time the full scope of her physical limitations and the courage it had taken for her to reveal herself this way. Then he walked into the room and sat in the chair beside her bed, taking her hand in his and feeling the same electric connection that had sustained them through months of long-distance communication. "You're still you," he said simply, and Cassie began to cry again, but this time with relief rather than fear. "You're still the person I've been talking to every night for 10 months. You're still the woman who makes me laugh and thinks deeply about everything and remembers every story I've ever told you. This doesn't change who you are inside. But it changes what we can have together," Cassie replied, her voice thick with tears. "It changes what kind of relationship is possible. I can't go places with you. I can't travel. I need help with basic tasks that most people take for granted. I'm not the partner you thought you were getting, Trevor. I'm not the woman you moved across the country to build a life with." Trevor squeezed her hand gently, looking directly into her eyes. "Maybe not," he said honestly. "But I'm here now, and you're here, and we can figure out what's possible instead of focusing on what isn't. I didn't come to Florida just to turn around and leave. I came because what we have together matters to me, and I want to see what we can build with honesty instead of secrets. Taking a leap of faith for love is something many of us can relate to. Share your thoughts in the comments about how far you'd go for someone you truly connected with, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about the complex ways people find and sometimes lose love in the modern world. They talked until after midnight that first night, with Trevor gradually learning the details of Cassie's daily routine, her medical needs, her hopes and fears about their future together. The conversation was different from their phone calls, more practical and immediate, but it still carried the emotional intimacy that had drawn them together initially. When he finally left to return to his hotel, they both understood that their relationship had entered entirely new territory, with possibilities and limitations that neither had fully anticipated when this journey began. Over the following weeks, Trevor attempted to build the life he had envisioned, but with a reality that bore no resemblance to his original plans. He moved out of the hotel and into a short-term rental apartment closer to Cassie's house, spending his days searching for a suitable location for his auto repair business and his evenings with her, learning to navigate the complex logistics of her care and the emotional weight of her isolation. The conversations that had once flowed so easily between them now carried an undercurrent of tension, as both struggled to reconcile their expectations with their new circumstances. Cassie required assistance with nearly every aspect of daily living, from bathing and dressing to moving from her bed to her wheelchair for the few hours each day when she had enough energy to sit upright. Her sister Rachel, a nurse who lived 30 minutes away, visited 3 times a week to help with medical care and personal hygiene, while a rotating team of home health aides provided additional support. Trevor found himself gradually becoming part of this care routine, helping Cassie adjust her position to prevent bed sores, bringing her meals, managing her medications, and providing the emotional support that had always been the foundation of their relationship. The physical demands were manageable, but the emotional toll proved more challenging than Trevor had anticipated. The vibrant, optimistic woman he had fallen in love with over the phone struggled with depression and anxiety that manifested in ways that made their interactions increasingly difficult. Some days Cassie was the warm, intelligent person he remembered from their conversations, eager to discuss current events or share memories or plan for their future together. Other days she was withdrawn and listless, overwhelmed by pain and fatigue and the crushing reality of her limitations, barely able to maintain conversation for more than a few minutes at a time. Trevor tried to maintain his usual patience and understanding, but he found himself growing frustrated with aspects of their situation that he hadn't fully considered during their long-distance relationship. The house smelled constantly of medical supplies and personal care products, despite everyone's best efforts to maintain cleanliness and freshness. Privacy was non-existent, with health aides arriving at scheduled times throughout the day and medical equipment dominating every room. The intimacy Trevor had imagined sharing with Cassie was impossible given her physical condition and the constant presence of caretakers who were essential to her survival. More troubling was the gradual realization that Cassie's condition was not stable or improving as she had led him to believe during their phone conversations. Her weight continued to increase despite medical intervention, and her mobility decreased noticeably even during the short time Trevor had been in Florida. What she had presented as a manageable health issue with potential for improvement was actually a progressive condition that would likely continue to worsen, requiring increasingly intensive care and medical intervention. The financial implications became clear as Trevor researched the costs of specialized medical care, home modifications, and the equipment necessary to maintain Cassie's quality of life. His savings, substantial as they were, would not stretch indefinitely to cover the expenses associated with her condition, especially if he was also trying to establish a new business. The auto repair shop he had planned to open would require significant startup capital, leaving little margin for unexpected medical costs or home care expenses. Trevor found himself isolated in ways he hadn't experienced even during his loneliest years in Iowa. His days revolved entirely around Cassie's schedule and needs, leaving little time for exploring his new city, meeting new people, or pursuing the hobbies and interests that had previously given his life structure and meaning. The classic car restoration that had been his passion for years was impossible in his small rental apartment, and the workshop space he had imagined sharing with Cassie remained a fantasy given her inability to leave her house. The social isolation was particularly difficult for Trevor, who had underestimated how much he would miss having friends and family nearby. Danny called regularly, but their conversations became strained as Trevor struggled to explain his situation without admitting the extent to which his new life differed from his expectations. Jamie sent occasional texts checking on his progress, but Trevor found himself unable to respond honestly about how his Florida adventure was unfolding. Cassie sensed his growing frustration and responded with increasing anxiety about their relationship, worried that he would abandon her as others had done when the reality of her condition became too overwhelming to ignore. She oscillated between clinging desperation, demanding constant reassurance that he wasn't planning to leave, and defensive anger, accusing him of judging her for circumstances beyond her control. Their conversations, once the highlight of both their days, became minefields of emotional triggers and unspoken resentments. The crisis came in early March, just 2 months after Trevor's arrival in Florida. Cassie developed a serious infection that required hospitalization, the first time she had left her house in over a year. The transportation alone required special medical equipment and paramedic assistance, and the hospital stay revealed the full extent of her medical complexity. Trevor found himself serving as her primary advocate and decision-maker, a role he had never explicitly agreed to assume but which fell to him in the absence of anyone else willing or able to take responsibility. During the week Cassie spent in the hospital, Trevor had time alone to truly consider his situation without the immediate pressure of her needs and emotions. He walked along the Florida beaches he had imagined exploring with her, visited the restaurants they had planned to try together, and experienced the retirement lifestyle he had envisioned, but entirely alone. The contrast between his dreams and his reality became impossible to ignore. He also had honest conversations with Cassie's medical team about her prognosis and care requirements. Her condition was likely to worsen significantly over the coming years, requiring increasingly intensive medical intervention and round-the-clock professional care. The doctors were gentle but direct about the likelihood that she would become completely bedridden within the next few years, requiring specialized facility care that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. When Cassie was finally discharged back to her home, Trevor made the decision that he had been avoiding for weeks. He couldn't continue their relationship as it had developed, couldn't provide the level of care she needed, and couldn't build the life he had envisioned within the constraints of her condition. The conversation was the most difficult of his life, with Cassie begging him to reconsider, promising that things would improve, insisting that their love could overcome any obstacle. But Trevor had learned something important about the difference between love and compatibility, between caring for someone and being able to build a sustainable life with them. He loved Cassie deeply, appreciated her intelligence and humor and the connection they had shared, but he couldn't sacrifice his remaining years to become her full-time caretaker. The life she needed was not one he was equipped to provide, and the life he wanted was not possible given her limitations. The practical arrangements took several weeks to finalize. Trevor helped arrange for increased professional care for Cassie, coordinating with her sister and social services to ensure she would have adequate support after his departure. He contributed financially to her care costs, understanding that his abandonment would leave her in an even more vulnerable position than before his arrival. Rachel, Cassie's sister, was supportive but not surprised by Trevor's decision. She had watched other potential partners flee when confronted with the reality of Cassie's condition, and she understood that not everyone was capable of the sacrifice required to maintain a relationship under such circumstances. She thanked Trevor for treating Cassie with dignity and kindness, for not simply disappearing without explanation as others had done. The drive back to Iowa in late April felt longer than the journey south had felt just 3 months earlier. Trevor returned to a life that was familiar but somehow smaller, taking his old job back at Jamie's shop, moving into a temporary apartment while he decided whether to rebuild the life he had dismantled or start over somewhere else entirely. Jamie welcomed him back without judgment, though she couldn't resist pointing out that she had tried to warn him about the risks of online relationships and long-distance romance. Danny was more direct in his relief, grateful to have his brother back safely but concerned about the emotional toll the experience had taken. Trevor was quieter than before, more cautious about trusting his own judgment, less inclined to take emotional risks or believe in the possibility of finding genuine connection with another person. The experience had changed him in ways that would influence his approach to relationships for the rest of his life. Trevor maintained minimal contact with Cassie for several months after his return to Iowa, checking occasionally on her health and well-being but gradually reducing communication as both of them moved toward acceptance of their situation. She continued to struggle with her health and isolation, eventually requiring facility care as her doctors had predicted. Her graphic design business provided some income and mental stimulation, but her world remained largely confined to medical settings and virtual relationships. The story of Trevor and Cassie illustrates the complexities of modern romance in an era when people can build deep emotional connections without ever sharing physical space, when technology allows for intimacy without complete honesty, when loneliness and hope can override practical judgment and common sense. Neither was entirely victim or villain in their failed relationship. Both had contributed to a situation that caused significant emotional and financial damage to everyone involved. For Trevor, the experience served as an expensive education about the importance of complete honesty in relationships, the difference between emotional connection and practical compatibility, and the risks of making major life changes based on incomplete information. He eventually rebuilt his life in Iowa, though he remained more guarded about romantic relationships and more skeptical about the possibility of finding the kind of connection he had believed he shared with Cassie. The financial cost of his Florida adventure was significant but not devastating. He lost money on the rushed sale of his properties and the aborted business venture, but his practical skills and strong work ethic allowed him to rebuild his savings and eventually establish a new auto repair business. The emotional cost was harder to quantify but potentially more lasting, affecting his ability to trust his own judgment and his willingness to be vulnerable with future partners. Years later, Trevor would reflect on the Cassie experience as both a cautionary tale and a learning opportunity. He had discovered that genuine connection requires more than shared conversation and emotional intimacy, that sustainable relationships depend on practical compatibility and complete honesty about circumstances and limitations. He had also learned that loneliness could be so powerful that it overrode rational decision-making, leading people to see what they wanted to see rather than what was actually there. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own experiences with online relationships and the risks of falling in love with someone you've never met, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. We explore these complex human stories because they help us understand the ways people connect, deceive, and sometimes destroy each other in their search for love and meaning. Your support helps us bring more of these important stories to light, and we appreciate every viewer who takes the time to engage with these difficult but necessary conversations about modern romance and the human condition.